Okay, hopefully everyone can see this. And we may as well get started. Okay, hi everyone, my name is Louise Capener and I'm part of the Computational Social Science team at the UK Data Service. And I'm going to be running today's Code Anxiety Club alongside my colleague Nadia Kanal, who's going to be manning the YouTube live stream chat. So yeah, before we get started, there's a few things to point out about interaction. So we're currently live streaming to YouTube, and these sessions are supposed to be interactive, and they're just a good opportunity for you to post any of your questions about the content that we cover. So if you'd like to get more involved, then make sure that you are signed into your YouTube account, and then you can post some comments, which Nadia can then read out to me during the session. Then I can respond to any of these and sort of help you out in any areas that you might be struggling with. But yeah, bear in mind that there is a slight delay in the live stream of about 30 seconds or something. So if you're wondering why I haven't answered your question yet, chances are I probably will, but you might have to wait another 30 seconds. So just a quick bit of advertising for our next Code Anxiety session. So we're going to be covering Git, which is a popular version control software often used by coders. So we'll teach you the importance of keeping track of changes to coding scripts over time, how to install Git and use basic Git commands, as well as doing some practical exercises to get to grips with using Git and its web platform, GitHub. So that should have a date next to it. I'm sorry that it doesn't, but if you do want more info about that, please check out our UKDS events page. Anyway, so yeah, back to today's session. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be covering naming conventions and why it's important to be consistent with these. We'll also be showing you how to structure your directory so that the folders and files associated with your project are all in the right place and are in nice, neat order. And finally, we'll be demonstrating how to set your directory, which is going to be crucial for any programmer as it determines where your scripts are run, where files are accessed, and where changes are made. So to get into grips with all of these project organization skills, it's going to really help you streamline your workflow and it'll set you up quite well as a future coder. So yeah, before we do get started on the more practical aspects, I just want to hammer home the benefits of keeping your files organized. So yeah, why bother with this? Well, firstly, it's going to save you a hell of a lot of time. A clear file structure means that you don't have to go trawling through your downloads folder to find that data set or the document that's associated with your project. Another massive benefit is that you're going to have less errors to work with. So you don't want to be revisiting a code script a few days after you've started work on it to get a file not found error when you try and read in your data because the file might have been moved to the wrong place. So it's just good because you're going to have everything right at hand. And finally, keeping your files and folders well organized is going to be crucial when you start using version control software like Git and GitHub. So that's what we're going to be covering in depth in the next Code Anxiety session. But basically, what this software is Git is basically used to help track changes to our code over time. So it's useful not only to us, but to those that might want to follow along with your code. So in that aspect, it's also vital in terms of reproducibility, that you've got everything documented and kept where it should be. But yeah, before you even start on Git, you want to have these fundamentals of project organization really baked in so that, you know, by the time you get started with Git, you'll see all your project folders nicely, neatly organized. So yeah, let's chat about naming conventions. So the first thing to get your head around is how to properly name your files. So the general rule of thumb is that file names should conform to these three simple rules. So rule number one, that you want to use lowercase numbers, hyphens, or underscores only when you're naming your files, okay? So this is because it ensures cross-platform compatibility as Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, so these different operating systems, they treat upper and lowercase and special characters differently. So if you're working with someone on the same project, what you want to do is you want to make sure you avoid these pitfalls by avoiding errors where, okay, it works on one person's Windows computer, but it doesn't on the other's Linux PC, for instance, or Mac or whatever. So yeah, lowercase numbers, hyphens, or underscores only. Another thing that you're really going to want to avoid doing is using spaces, as these break command line scripts, as do weird symbols like the ampersand or a hash key. And that's because spaces and symbols are interpreted differently by the command line. So for instance, the space key is taken as what's known as an argument separator, and the ampersand symbol is used to trigger a background command. So, if you have file names that have spaces or weird symbols, you're going to run into quite a few errors if you're working on the command line. And because a lot of coding involves the command line, that does end up being a big issue. I mean, I think you can get around it if you enclose your file name in quotations, but it's just not a good practice to get into. So yeah, I would advise no spaces, no weird symbols. And finally, what's really important is that you'll want to make sure that your file names contain key information about that file. So for instance, if you look at the table, you can see, I mean, at first glance, you just think, wow, this looks kind of gross, right? What a long-winded way of doing things. But it's actually really important to set things out this way. So you can see that I've listed some good names, which include all the information about that file, and their corresponding bad names, so what you don't want to do. So the first one includes the date and the fact that we're working with raw data here. So working with a raw, some raw survey data. So you can see we've got the date here. So that tells me when I've started working on it. I've got information about what it is. So it's good here to state that it's the raw data, because then I know, okay, this is the data in its first form. So yeah, that's a very good good name here. You can see we're conforming to all of the rules. We've got only lowercase, we've got numbers and underscores and dashes. We've not got any spaces or weird symbols, and we've got that key bit of information. The second, again, includes the date and the fact that the file contains web scraping results. Whilst you've got the third file here, which includes that that important information, which is that it's containing some exploratory analysis, and that it's version 1 as well. You'll see that a lot, V1, V2. So, you don't have to go too overboard with this. So don't think, oh, am I going to have to put a date and a version for each file? Not necessarily. You might only be working on small projects. So just put whatever information you think will help you keep track of things, or could help someone out who may be wanting to reproduce your code. So you can see all these sort of bad names on the side. You can see why they're bad names, right? So we've got white space here. We've got weird symbols such as the open brackets here. Again, we've got a bad name here. It just says my results. What results, right? So that's why we contain that key information. Another bad name, untitled one. It doesn't tell us anything, and it could easily be deleted, because you could think, oh, well, that's just something I made when I was just playing around on Python, and you could be deleting your exploratory analysis. So yeah, it seems pedantic, seems annoying, and I must admit, I'm not always, as strict as I would like to be with them, but it is a really good practice to sort of bake in for a project organization. Okay, so now you know how to name your files, but how should you arrange your files and folders? Okay, so do we have one big folder for all of our files? Do we have folders within folders? What should things look like? Well, what you're going to want to do is create a nice folder tree for each project. And a folder tree is a hierarchical map of every folder in your project. So you can think of it like a family tree of your project with a root at the top and branches for each logical part. So instead of just dumping all our files in one long list, we group related files. So you can see here, we've got the root. Okay, so that would be the project here, and you've got your nice little branches. Okay, so these are the folders that go off it. So we've got data, which you can see this little code comment here, tells you what it's containing, are raw and cleaned CSVs. So for instance, we had that example before, right, of someone using a raw survey data. That's going to go in there. We've got scripts, so that's Python or R code, so that's our coding script. Any outputs that we generate, so these are plots, models, or just coding logs. And documents, so for your projects, you might have certain documents related to it. Maybe you've it's a team project and you've got some meeting notes or some specifications for what the project should look like, what the analysis is going to include. You can keep that there. So yeah, why do we do this? Well, we do it for clarity so that when you open the project in the future, you instantly know where to look for important files. And it's also for safety so that raw data stays in in your read-only in data, which helps you avoid overwriting the source file. And it also makes things automation friendly because your project files always sit in the same named folders, so code scripts can then rely on predictable paths. So yeah, I've already gone through this one here, but you can see that on the left, what we have here is an image of a recommended starter layout. So this is what I'd recommend for those of you that are working on your first projects. You'd want to have the root folder as whatever your project name is. And then you want to have just a rough, sort of approximation of these sort of folders coming off it. So yeah, we have data, which is where your raw data and your clean data live. So you could have a folder inside data for raw data or clean data. Sometimes what I do, you can see a real world example on the right, is that I'll keep my raw data maybe just in the data folder, and I will keep my clean data in clean data so I can have it easily at hand. Then there's scripts. So like I said, that houses all of your coding scripts, outputs, which contains any plots or models that you generate. And like I said, good practice to have a document folder, which contains any Word documents or text files that are related to your project. So could be meeting notes or whatever. And finally, you can see that there's something that we haven't covered yet called a README. So you can see it's got this little file extension here, .md, which stands for a markdown file. So what it is basically it's a fancy sort of text document, and it normally contains a few lines about the project. And we're going to get stuck into them more in the next code anxiety session where we focus on version control and GitHub, because when using GitHub, you'll often see README files on people's project pages on the desktop application, sorry, on the website, and then you'll see that people have a README. It's just a nice 5-line intro to what is contained in that project. So on the right, you can see I've included an example of one of my own projects. So you can see that I haven't, followed the recommended layout exactly. So like I said, I like to create a data folder which contains my raw data and then a separate clean data folder. So yeah, keep in mind that you don't have to follow the recommended layout to a T. Just make sure that everything lives in a logical place and that you group files into their own branches. So for those of you that are following along and you want to find out how you can generate these folder trees, obviously to make your own, you need to create the folders, right? But if you want to then visualize a folder tree for one of your projects, you can see that I've got the requisite commands here that we can test out. So if you're using Windows and Mac, it's going to be the same command. The only difference is for Windows that you don't have to install anything because tree is built in, so the tree command's built in. If you're on Mac, you will have to install once with Homebrew. So if you don't have Homebrew installed, don't worry about doing this now. Look at installing Homebrew, and then you can just run this brew install tree command, and then that'll generate a tree. So I'm going to demo it on Mac, but if you're working on Windows, what you're going to see is a diagram with folders only. So you would have to do tree/F to see folders and files. So you can see if we go back, you can see that I've got, is it just, I think it's just folders. Yeah, so it's just showing these folders here, but you can get it to show files as well, which I'll show you how to do. So if you run tree, you'll see a diagram with folders and files, and you can do this dash followed by D to see folders only. So I guess what I'll do now is I'll stop sharing and I'll share my main screen so that we can try out this command. Okay, so you should be able to see my desktop here. Okay, so you can see we're in the root folder. How do we know? Because we've got this little tilde here, which is Mac's symbol for our root folder. So we're going to use that cd command, which is used to change directories. We're going to go into my documents folder, into my git work folder, which contains all of my mini projects that I'm working on. And I guess we'll view, what's it called? Interactive. Let's have a look at my interactive visualizations folder. So if I wanted to visualize just the main folders in that, I would do tree followed by D, and you can see it's got that's the root bit indicated there, and it's telling you that there's 7 directories there. So we've got 7 main folders here. You can see I have a data folder, I have an images folder, so that must be the images that have been outputted from this code. I've got Python code, so that will contain some Python code scripts, R code, and a shapefiles folder, which just contains some data for mapping stuff, and also an LADS folder, which again contains some stuff for mapping. So if we just did tree, what you can see is you can see everything within. So you can see this really has helped me organize. Let's just put this up a bit. You can see just how much it's helped me organize this, because my data is containing all of my stuff. What I've not done is I've not separated it into cleaned and raw. So you can see here some of them contain that, you know, I've modified it here to include some key information. And you can see that I'm not perfectly following my own the rules that I gave you, right? Because I've got some uppercase here. I don't have any spaces, but yeah, it could be definitely could be sort of how do you say the file names could be better for sure. So that's something to keep in mind. I also, if I was looking to improve things, I might separate out my CSV files and my HTML files, maybe. So yeah, I might also create a raw data folder within this and a clean data folder just for better organization. And you can see I've got my Python code here, which again, I could separate those HTML files out. That might be quite useful to do. I've got my README. I've got some R code, which seems fine. It's not as messy as Python code is. So yeah, that's how you view a tree for your project. So you can see here it's telling me not just the number of directories, it's saying within those 7 directories I've got 46 files. So that's quite helpful. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. What we'll do now is we'll just I'll move back to sharing my screen. Okay. So yeah, Now we'll just chat a little bit about relative versus absolute paths. So for those of you that have watched our previous sessions, we have covered this before in, I think, the session was called Pathways to Success. So if you want more detail about this, you can check it out on our YouTube. You can just type in UKDS Code Anxiety Pathways to Success and you should be able to find it. But yeah, we're just going to briefly cover it again because it's essential to project organization. So a file path is the address of files or directories on your system. So just like you have your home address, which tells someone where to find your house, a file path points to the exact location of a file on your system. And file paths are crucial when it comes to coding because, you know, if you're reading in a file or saving one into a particular folder, if that pathway is wrong, your computer's then not going to know where to look. So absolute paths provide the full address of a file. So they start from the root directory. So you can see there's a couple of examples here. You can see we start at the root and we go from each subsequent folder to locate our text file. So yeah, for Windows, it's important to bear in mind that they use these backward slashes, whereas in Mac we use forward slashes. And in Windows, the root folder is what do you call it, symbolized by this C followed by a colon, whereas in Mac, if you're working on the command line, you'll see that wiggly little line. So remember, you'll see that tilde. Then we have a relative path example. So you can see that whereas a relative path, a relative path doesn't start from the root directory. Instead, it starts from your current working directory, so the folder that you're in. So for example, if you're already in the documents folder within the command line, you can then use a relative path to refer to the text file directly without inputting the full path. So you can see I was doing that already when I was in my when I was navigating to my interactive visualization file. I was using relative pathways, right? I was doing CD, documents, and then git work instead of doing CD users / document / So using relative pathways when undertaking a project is beneficial because it allows for reproducibility and portability. And one thing that's important to note is that your code assumes you're running the notebook from inside the project folder. So when you're working in Visual Studio Code, for instance, if you're a Python coder, you need to remember to go to File, Open Folder on your project first. In the next session, like I said, we'll be focusing a lot on the version control software, Git, which allows other people to clone your project and run your code scripts. And when someone clones your project, they keep that same folder tree, right? So by using a relative pathway, you can ensure that they can easily run your code, which they wouldn't be able to do if you used an absolute pathway because as you can see, it often includes your username, which is going to be unique to you, so then you have to change it a lot. And using relative pathways is just going to be way easier for you as well. If you have a bunch of projects with similar tree structures, you can easily read in files from the standard data folder or save clean files to the clean data folder without having to invoke the full address. So it's just going to be way easier. So yeah, let's have a little look about how to do that. So in terms of how to set your directory in Python, it is ridiculously easy. So this demo is specific to Visual Studio Code, but the same principle applies to other IDEs or code editors like Jupyter Notebooks. The directory is set to the folder you open. So I'll just give this a little go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up Visual Studio Code, and then I'll open up a recent project that I've been working on. And that should set my directory to that folder. And we can test that it sets it by using that pwd command in Mac or the cd command in Windows. So yeah, let's just do that. Just check what we're on for time. So we've only got 5 minutes. So what I might do is I might show you guys this, and then we might have time to go through a few of the practical exercises, but what I'll do is the slides will be uploaded, so if you want to go back and cover them in your own time, If we run out of time, then I suggest you go do that. So yeah, let's. Visual Studio. Mm, I think what I've done recently, but it never shows up in my applications, which is crazy because it means it's so hard to find. Nor does it show up in the launch. Okay. Sorry about this, just getting everything sorted. Okay. So yeah, I don't know how to get it off, just default into the file that I was already on. But I'll show you how to basically open your project folder in Visual Studio Code if you don't already have it loaded. So you'd go to File, Open Folder, and you want to open it on that root folder of the project. So you can see I've got a bunch of my projects here. So I go to, what was I working on? Interactive Viz. Okay, so let's open that. And as you can see, like I said, it's already open. Close this. So you can see, right, that it's already got my relative pathway here. It's telling me I'm in this folder. But if I wanted to check that I've set the directory right, I would do pwd, and sure enough, it gives me that full absolute file pathway there, and it tells me that I'm in the interactive visualization project. Okay, so now what I could do is, let's say I've created a test file. I'm not going to run all this, but basically what this allows you to do, you can see I'm using this pandas command here. I would have to do that if I was actually doing it. And that means now that instead of doing, I don't know, users, recap, documents, git work, what's this, interactive viz, instead of doing all that now, I can use this really nice relative file pathway. Why? Because, well, I'm already in the interactive viz folder here. So all I have to do is refer to data, that folder there, and then just pick out the file that I want to read in. So you can see that's why that's how you set your directory. And that also illustrates here why relative file pathways are so useful when you get into coding, because you don't want to be messing about with full absolute file pathways, nor is it going to be easy for someone who clones your file to then, they're going to be thinking, oh, okay, well, I'll have to change, it's like users, like recap, I don't know, documents, whatever. You're going to have to think, okay, well, I need to change that to me. It just becomes a really pedantic, drawn out thing. That's why it's good to get your head around file pathways early on. So yeah, I hope that made sense. We are coming up close to time now. I'm just gonna see, is there anything in the chat that needs to be addressed?
No questions on the chat, no.
Okay, well, in that case, what I'll do is I'll share the practical exercises, and unfortunately it looks like we're not going to have time to cover them today, but I will make sure that the slides are uploaded, and you can go on the events page and you can try them out yourself, just because we are getting close to time now. Let's share that present view. Okay, yeah, so here's some practical exercises that you can go away and try for yourself. So you've got the first one here, which is quite easy. Just rename two messy files. So create two sample files on your desktop and then just rename them using the conventions that we've specified today. So think of a good name for them. Another exercise that you could do is you could build a folder tree for your first project. So this here, this code basically tells you how you can create that tree outline without, sort of having to do the whole manual thing in the sort of file explorer GUI. You can do it in your command line. It's a really good practice to get into. You could just create this nice skeleton of your tree so that you can just shove all the relevant files into it as you go along. So that's one you could do. And finally, another thing it'd be good for you to get to grips with is just reading a CSV in with a relative path. So you can see that I've included examples for Python. So I assume here that you're using Visual Studio Code, which is what I recommend for new coders in Python. Or you could do the same in R. So just open up RStudio and it does say here locate the CSV I've given you. So yeah, I did have a good CSV for this, but I can't for the life of me actually find it. So what I suggest is that you download some sample survey data, or you could, create your own spreadsheet with a few rows and columns, and then just try and read that in. Okay, so yeah, final thing to say is just thank you if you've been watching. If you want any further help, you can email me. I've got my email here, or you can contact me on Twitter or X, and you can follow the UK Data Service for any further updates on our events.
Just before you close out, there's a quick comment on the chat from Jules who says, did you mention that Control Shift and C copies a location as a path? And obviously this is on Windows, so if you're on Mac, you can use Command Control C, and that will also copy a location as a path. So I think we're just sharing.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, so is that like just highlighting a file and clicking on it and then
Yeah,
you can do that into yeah. So I can actually demonstrate that. That's a really good point. Just before we go, okay. So let's share desktop one last time. Let's send this. Yeah, so Jules has made a really good point there in the chat. So let's zoom in a bit here. So yeah, if you've got a file and you want to get its pathway, what you can do is so let's say, for instance, it was important for me to move this PowerPoint that we're working on today somewhere else. Okay, but I'm like, well, I want a pathway for it. What you can do is you can just copy, Control V, and you've got its full pathway there. Another way that you can, if you're wondering, well, what's this pathway? You can go on Quick Look too, and oh, no, you don't go on Quick Look, you go on Get Info, and it tells you where as well. So that's a really good trick to have, and yeah, you can do that in Windows as well. So keep that in mind. Okay, I think unless there's anything in the chat from Jules that we might close out for today.
I was just waiting for the delay, but no, I think she's covered that point. So
All right, brilliant. Then I guess thanks for those that were following along, and we will see you next time.